Hey everybody, Jason Todd, aka the Second Robin, aka the Red Hood, aka other names, I'm sure. He sure had his ups and downs. Becoming orphaned and living on the street looks pretty not great, but getting to be Robin and fighting alongside Batman definitely seems cool. Dying, on the other hand, does sound like the worst, and coming back to life might sound like a good thing, but the process seems kind of scary and probably painful. Oh hey, we're talking about the death and resurrection of Jason Todd today. Welcome to Comic Misconceptions. I'm Scott. Jason Todd. Nope, I already did that. Sorry. As you know, here at CM, we don't just do regular origin stories and history of videos because there are many great channels here on YouTube that already do that sort of thing better than we could. What we do like to do is dive into the behind the scenes of how characters and stories were created, as well as answer very specific questions that you might ask. For example, Charlie Williams asked if I could do an episode explaining how Jason Todd really came back to life because the whole thing is a bit confusing. Yes, Charlie, I will do that for you. Before we can talk about the death and return of Jason, we first need to know a little bit about his creation as a character. Jason Todd first appeared in Batman number 357 from 1983, but why was he created in the first place? And why did he take the name Robin? Why didn't he have his own name? Well, honestly, the people at DC didn't even want a new Robin character in the first place. They wanted the first Robin, Dick Grayson, back at Batman's side, but he was off doing Teen Titans stuff. Marv Wolfman and George Perez had liked what they were doing with Dick at the time. They aged him up a few years, made him smarter, did away with a lot of the puns that he used to spout off while fighting, and the readers seemed to like Dick's character development as a leader and not just Batman's sidekick. However, the creative team behind the Batman titles during the early 80s was desperate to have Robin back with Batman. The problem is that they wanted to bring Dick back down a few years to make him younger. Marv Wolfman said that they wanted to make him even younger than he had been before he left Batman. They couldn't just introduce another kid into the mix. It would screw up the whole marketing. The saying is Batman and Robin, not Batman and someone else. They needed Robin back, but Wolfman was not giving him up. So he came up with this idea that he said was, quote, motivated totally by greed. He suggested that he could change Dick Grayson's name to something else, Nightwing, and that would free up the name Robin to be used by some new, younger kid. And that's basically how we got the character of Jason Todd. And this especially makes a lot of sense when you look at the original origin of the character that was almost a carbon copy of Dick Grayson. Jason was a circus acrobat with his mom and dad, and together made up the Flying Todds. After his parents were killed, he was adopted by Bruce Wayne, where he would eventually become Robin. Very original. But it makes sense, because they didn't want to change things up too much. They wanted Dick Grayson back, but they couldn't get him, so they created a very similar character who was a few years younger to fill the need without shifting the dynamic too much. This origin would change after the continuity-altering Crisis on Infinite Earths event. Now, I don't really want to get into a bunch of detail about what that is, but all you really have to know is that DC's continuity was super inconsistent, so they used this event as a way of cleaning up histories and origins and characters and stories, patch up a bunch of holes, and change things up. It was after the Crisis on Infinite Earths where Jason Todd's origin was changed from a circus acrobat to an orphan on the street, where he would meet Batman after stealing tires off the Batmobile. It was changed again in the New 52, where he and Batman first met after he was caught stealing prescription drugs from Dr. Leslie Tompkins. After only a short time as the second Robin, Jason Todd was killed by the Joker in the A Death in the Family story arc. In that arc, his death was famously decided by the fans. The Death in the Family story arc had Jason find out that his mother was still alive, so he went to Ethiopia to reunite with her, but it turns out that she was being blackmailed into working with the Joker, who captured Jason and beat him up with a crowbar, leaving him and his mother locked in a building with a bomb, which exploded before Batman could get there. In a big cliffhanger, the team at DC let the fans decide the outcome. Would Jason survive the explosion, or would he die? Dial these numbers to cast your vote, but probably don't do it now, because I assume they don't work. Do whatever you want. But why would DC want to kill him off in the first place? Comic book writer and artist Jim Starlin, who wrote A Death in the Family, said that he never liked the idea of a kid sidekick. In fact, once he started working on Batman, he started campaigning to kill Jason off. And here's where it gets kind of interesting and maybe a little messed up. During this time period where Starlin was trying to get Robin killed, DC was workshopping a story about AIDS. According to him, they sent around memos to everyone asking which character they think should get AIDS, and to no one's surprise, Starlin enthusiastically volunteered Jason Todd. They never ended up doing the story, but Starlin's determination to kill off Robin gave editor Denny O'Neil the idea to let the fans decide on his death. At the end of Batman number 427, there were two numbers that you could call depending on if you wanted Jason to live or die. Thousands of votes were counted, and the sentence was death. It was incredibly close though, with less than 100 votes making the difference. Now, because of how close it was, there's been this conspiracy that the voting system was stacked by one guy who called in a lot. Denny O'Neil said that he had heard it was some lawyer who lived in California and programmed his computer to dial the number to kill Robin every few minutes. And if that is indeed what happened, and because the votes were so close, that guy would have been the guy responsible for killing Jason Todd. Now, there's really no way that we'll ever get to the bottom of this one, unless you are that guy and you have the evidence of those phone calls, in which case, I'd love the exclusive if you could contact me, but it doesn't really matter because in the end, Jason was dead. Which brings us to his resurrection. Part of me wonders if he was brought back to life at least partly because of that voting conspiracy and that he was never really meant to die, as you can see here in this panel where it says he was never really meant to die. That aside, this is the heart of the question that Charlie asks. How was Jason Todd brought back to life? If you go by the genuinely wonderful animated movie Batman Under the Red Hood, it's as simple as Ra's al Ghul stealing Jason's corpse and immersing him in the Lazarus Pit. Lazarus Pit, in a nutshell, it's just like the Fountain of Youth. It's a pool of unknown chemicals that can heal the sick and injured, as well as restore youth, depending on how long you're submerged, which is how Ra's has lived for centuries. The New 52 also references Jason coming back to life via the Lazarus Pit, but it's still kind of a little vague about the details, at least in the time that I'm making this video. We don't definitively know what happened between his death and him waking up in the Lazarus Pit, though it seems to imply that Talia al Ghul dug up his body and restored him in the pit. In the comics pre-New 52, it was something a little bit more creative. I'm going to try to explain it in an easy to understand way, but it is kind of complicated and just weird, so hang in there. After Crisis on Infinite Earths, an alternate version of Superman known as Superboy Prime was locked away in a pocket dimension where he grew incredibly homesick for a world that no longer existed. Frustrated and angry, he uses all of his might and punches reality. Really, he just punches the barrier of the pocket dimension so hard that it shatters, creating continuity changes in the DC universe, showing us yet again that if you're Superman, you can just get out of most scenarios by punching things. I hope that makes sense. I mean, I know it doesn't make sense, but I hope the explanation was clear. I probably skipped over a lot of important details, but yeah. One of the continuity changes in these reality punches was that Jason Todd woke up in his coffin, buried alive, as we can see in Batman Annual number 25, with nothing but his sheer will to live. He dug himself out of his grave and survived in a brain-dead state where he could do nothing but act on instinct. He was taken in by Talia al Ghul, who, against her father's commands, pushed Jason into the Lazarus Pit, not to bring him back to life like the other interpretations, but to simply restore his mind to how it was before he was killed. And that's really it. That's the story of how he came back to life in the comics. After he was restored in the Lazarus Pit, he would train for a while before returning to Gotham, where he would work with Hush to mess with Batman's mind, as well as take on the moniker of Red Hood, which was a former alias of the Joker from back in the day. As the Red Hood, he would use lethal force while hunting down criminals and doing what Batman wouldn't. Most notably, he attempted to kill the Joker, who took his life from him in the first place. He has since gone on to have many adventures as the Red Hood, which is all stuff I'm not gonna get into. But there you go. That's the story of his creation, death, and resurrection, with a lot of fun behind the scenes stuff in there as well. Hopefully you learned something new today. Thank you for the suggestion, Charlie. But what do you guys think? Do you like Jason's return as the Red Hood? Would you have voted for Robin to die in the first place? And what character today would you vote to kill off? Let's talk about it in the comments, and probably start some heated debates, I just realized. Obviously, I didn't go over a ton of Jason's history as a character. As I said before, that's not really what we do here on this show. But I do have links in the description to a few other videos by other people here on YouTube that dive into more of the origins and history of Jason Todd, if you want to learn even more about the character. And if this is your first time hanging out with us here at NerdSync, we do weekly comic book videos that expand your understanding and enrich your comic book reading experience, so hit that big sexy subscribe button so you don't miss out on anything. Once again, I'm Scott. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram, and we'll see you right here on Friday for a tie-in video and more things I thought you knew about comics. See ya. Also, I'm sorry for missing last week.